Sometimes, when I see friends guitar players focusing their attention so much on pedals, amplifiers, or pickup changes, I have the sensation that the guitar itself is the most underrated piece of a guitar player's gear. That might sound like a paradox, but how many times have we heard that famous guitar heroes have an incredible guitar tone because of the magic studio equipment they use? Well, those people, or more exactly their producers, definitely use high-end studio equipment, but at least a big part of the secret that stands behind their great guitar tone is not necessarily in the magic studio equipment, but in the guitars they use. The guitar that I brought you today is an instrument that many recording stars could envy, an all-original vintage 1962 Gibson SG Les Paul Standard. This guitar comes from the collection of my departed friend Gianni Bucci, and I will never thank enough his wife Fiorella and his sons Silvio and Giorgio for lending me this family jewel. Technically speaking, this is the 1962 Les Paul model. We all know that the Les Paul guitar is not to be considered the flagship model of the Gibson company, but that was not the case back in the 50s. The Les Paul line was quite ahead of its time, and in the years that followed its introduction, ironically, it was anything but a commercial success. Probably guitar players in big bands and orchestras were not sure about how to use it, and would feel more confident with a more traditional hollow body guitar. That was a decade before Mike Bloomfield, Keith Richards and Eric Clapton showed the world what a Les Paul guitar could do, and only a few black guitar players were pioneering the distorted sounds the Les Paul would become famous for. To revive its sales, Gibson decided that it was time to drop the well-known Les Paul design with a single cutaway body style, and in 1961 introduced a completely restyled Les Paul line. They came up with a whole new shape, with thin lightweight mahogany body, comfortable highly contoured edges, and radical double cutaway, which made the higher frets much more easily accessible. On the Standard, we can read the Les Paul signature as model designation on the truss rod cover. Today, we must reckon that Gibson succeeded in its goal to boost the sales of the Les Paul line. In fact, with the introduction of the new design, the production did increase. In October 1963, Gibson dropped the Les Paul name from the redesigned line, which was simply left with the generic designation of solid guitar, SG, name already in use on the double P90 Special. Hence today the name SG Les Paul applies to the redesigned Junior, Standard and Custom Les Pauls made between 1961 and 1963. Whatever you name them, these guitars still preserve the high quality that always distinguished the Les Paul line. The SG Les Paul Standard and Custom feature PAF pickups from the last generation, with shorter Alnico 5 magnet and more consistent specifications. You can find them in 3 versions, with patent-applied 4-bottom sticker, much sought after by collectors, with an early patent number sticker, pickups known as patent number PAFs, or in the transition, some pickups have no sticker at all, like this one. Basically, these pickups are all the same, the only difference being in the sticker. In the control cavity, we find ceramic disc capacitors, which replaced the Sprague Bumblebee previously in use. The SG Les Paul came with a Maestro Vibrola tailpiece, probably in the attempt of competing with the well-engineered, synchronized, floating tremolo on Fender guitars. The first SG Les Paul, made between 1961 and early 1962, usually featured the sideways vibrola, while later models usually feature either the rare vibrato with short ebony block tail or the more common lyre vibrola, like on this guitar. All these Maestro Vibrola tailpieces never gained much reputation among players, who generally consider them a bummer for sustain and stability of intonation. Many players even came to the decision of removing the vibrola and replacing it with the conventional stop bar. Honestly, I also tried another SG Les Paul, and it was an absolute tone monster with its stock sideways vibrola, so I would not lean much in that direction. The SG Standard wrote a good share of the rock history. We've seen it in the hands of Mick Taylor, who had a model with Bigsby B5 tailpiece during the years with John Mayall's Blues Breakers and the Rolling Stones. Link Wray, George Harrison, Derek Trucks, and Eric Clapton, who used with the Cream a 1964 or 65 SG nicknamed The Fool with a flashy paint job.
Those two are the volume. This one is for that pickup, and that one is for that pickup. And this is the tone for that pickup, and this is the tone for that pickup.
Angus Young of the AC/DC seems to generally favor the late 60s models with larger butt-wings pickguard, as also used by Robbie Krieger of The Doors and Leigh Stevens, first lead guitarist of the great San Francisco psychedelic rock group Blue Chair. A few years ago, I bought a Gibson Custom Shop SG Les Paul Ratio, hoping that with some modifications it could come somewhere close to this great guitar. But I came to realize that the originals are on an entirely different category.